Hello, welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg with your host, Greg Deckler. So in today's video, I'm going to be covering the three new DAX functions that came out in the December release of Power BI Desktop. And there've already been, a number of blog posts and LinkedIn posts and otherwise, including one from my good friend Brian Julius, um, that is espousing the how great these functions are and what a boon to DAX they are and how game changing they are. And I'm sorry, Brian, but you and I are going to have to maybe agree to disagree on this one a little bit. Um, Surprise, surprise, I am not nearly as sold on these functions as it seems like all of my peers are. And I'll get into the reasons as why in this video and kind of show you everything. So I recreated like the examples and then alternative ways of doing it. And there's some definite issues that both specific issues, but even larger conceptual issues that I think need to be addressed with these functions. So let's get into it. We're gonna, as you can see, I've got the December 2022 feature summary here, making it easier to do comparison calculations. And this is where they introduce index, offset, and window. And then they come down here and they have examples for all of them, right? So the index allows you to form comparison calculations by retrieving a row that is an absolute position. All right. And so they have documentation on the index function. And just, right off the bat, as far as like quote unquote easier, the documentation on this is pretty involved. Just even in like, what each of these mean and what you're supposed to be doing with each of these things. They've also, introduced order by and partition by two additional DAX functions that are kind of helper functions. And then you start getting down into the remarks, and it's like, holy moly, there's a lot of rules to take into account, or a lot of conditions, and oh, if this is true, then this, if it's not, it's this other thing. I mean, there's I just, in general, I'm not a fan of these kind of black box sort of functions that sort of, work their magic, and you don't really have much control over it at all. I think it gets people into trouble more often than it helps. But let's take a look at this. So I've got so I recreated using the AdventureWorks database. And so here is the example. I just copied and pasted it from the article. And this is what it looks like in kind of properly formatted DAX, if you will. So you're using a first issue. It's like, okay, if you're going to introduce these functions and you're going to include an example in the blog post, maybe you kind of dot the I and cross the T where, the example doesn't actually return as if it's invalid DAX. I don't know. Call me crazy. Um, Whatever. So normally in select columns you'd have an additional third parameter here, which is the name of the column. In certain circumstances, you don't need it, even though there's nothing about in the select columns documentation that says it's not required, that says it's optional. And it results in something that you think is going to be invalid, right? But it actually does work. Okay, so this is the example they used was they created a column. And so they're selecting the index, the first index from dim customer, the table. They're ordering it by birth date. So they're trying to find the oldest customer, right? So in order by the default, most DAX functions, the default is ascending versus descending. So the oldest is going to be first and the newest is going to be last. If it's ascending and descending, it's going to be reverse. They partition it by last name, and then they return the full name. So for all of the Garcias, which I have this kind of filtered to in the last name in the data view, it returns Adriana Garcia, which is, the oldest. Okay, this is the right result. Okay, so now the normal way that I would solve this problem, and here's the thing, it's not like I see this problem very often. And really I go by the forums, right? What questions are people asking in the forums? And this one doesn't really come up a lot. And there's known good patterns for how to do this, right? And then the usual way of solving this problem is what I call like a double lookup. So you grab the last name, right? And we're going to get the oldest birth date. So we're going to do a min-x. We're going to filter the dim customer, last name equals last name, get the birth date. Then we just do a lookup, another min-x, or we could use anything here. some, or your max X or whatever. And we then do a filter on the dim customer, birthday equals oldest birth date, full name, and actually was birthday. And so actually really what this one really should be, if I was going to be super correct about this, last name equals last name. Okay, so again, we enter that. And it also returns Adriana Garcia. Okay, that's the kind of the normal way that I would solve this problem. Now, if I wanted a more generalized solution that is similar, more similar to the way index works, right? We have that pattern as well. And I don't think this is super complicated DAX, number one. So if I wanted a more generalized solution, right, that is more in tune with the way index works, I grab my last name, I filter out my customers for that last name, and I create a table, right, a single column table. I concatenate that up using the pipe character. And this is back to Brian Julius's "I'm looking at you, Greg," about torturing the path function into serving this purpose, right? We create our table. We do an add columns to generate the series over from 1 to the number of rows within our customers table. We add the column full name where we pluck out the path item from our concatenate X string. And then our result basically is, okay, max X filter table where the value, the generate series value is equal to 1, or we could put any number in here, right? 2, 3, 4, any absolute position. And return the full name, and we get the result. And you can see that we get the same result, right? They offset customer by last name, number in last name. I don't know. I put the no index. 2. We also get Adriana Garcia. So it's the same. I don't think this is super complicated DAX. I think this is a pretty well-known pattern that I've used to solve many, many, many problems in DAX. So we get the same thing. Now, I also created these as measures. So we have the same measures here, full name, and we get, so this is the one that's using still in bed, but it's not. I just created this as a measure, right? Instead of as a column, we also get returned the same thing. No index measure is this one down here, or this one, I guess you could say, knowing this measure. So it's the same thing where I just really the only difference is I get the max of the last name. And then this one right here is this guy. And again, I'm really the only difference is I'm grabbing the max of the last name, and the rest of the code's the same. Okay, now I will give them props. And Rick DeGroot, I did use the selection pane and renamed my tables appropriately, my visuals appropriately. So we can start the performance analyzer right, and we can refresh our visuals. And you can see, we do get better performance from index. There's no question about that. In some cases, pretty significantly. But in some cases, it's not as significant, right? We're saving a couple hundred, milliseconds, if you will. And this is on, and again, this is back to my opinion that the vast majority of data models that are out there are no more complex, certainly no more complex or larger than the AdventureWorks database. And so even in the AdventureWorks database, we're saving a couple hundred milliseconds. And that's really it. It's not going to be noticeable to the end users. But it is faster, I will say that. And you can really notice the difference if you look at, say, the DAX query that's performed, 16 milliseconds versus 88 versus kind of traditional, which is 28. So, definitely faster. So props for that. I will agree that it is faster. Whether it's easy or not, we wouldn't unnecessarily go down that path. Because again, it's, in my opinion, easier or harder is dependent upon, like, it's harder to learn new concepts and new things. Versus if you can use one pattern for pretty much everything, then that's really the easier path to learn in the long run. Learn one way of doing things, and then it works for everything, right? So, all right, I'll get off that soapbox. Let's close that one down. So that's index. And again, this is going to be a common theme throughout this video is why I don't see people asking this question, like that they need this in the forums, that this is a pain point for Power BI users that are out there. That's widespread versus every day in the forums I see measure total problems, right? So why are we fixing things that nobody's asking for versus fixing like the real problems in DAX? Um, it's a mystery to me sometimes. It's hard for me to like understand the prioritization that goes on. All right, let's move on to offset. So this is the offset example that they gave, and I need to go find my different table, which is my fact table. So this is the total sales measure, right? So I have a total sales measure just as a sum, and then my total sales diff is taken from the blog article. And so that it's like not if not is blank total sales, then total sales minus. So they're trying to calculate the difference between the current sales in context versus the previous sales, previous month sales or previous thing color sales. In this case, we're getting the previous color. So we're doing a calculate of the total sales, doing the offset of -1, filter all selected, not as blank total sales, and I'll get into why this matters here in the latter part of the video. So this is what it returns, right? And this is what you'll see in the blog article. So the first one, there is no previous color, so it's just the same. And this is going to be the difference between blue versus black. It's negative, right? So, there it is. But again, we can do the same thing with using the same exact pattern as we used for index. So again, one way of doing that, learn one way to do things easier than learning multiple ways of doing things. So again, I grab my distinct colors where I filter all selected, not as blank total sales. I concatenate the X those up. I do the same thing in terms of creating the table, and I pluck out the color. And then I add my columns. I do a sum X of the all selected, color equals color, total sales. Do my index, where I'm grabbing the max, filter the color to the current color and get the value, right? Which is my index. And then if I want the previous, -1, then I can get that by saying, okay, total sales minus, I do the max X. It's basically a lookup where I'm finding the index that's one before my current index and return the value and get the result. And as you can see, it's the same. You get the same amount. Now, again, let's clear this off and we'll refresh the visuals. Offset, no offset. It is clearly faster. Is it tremendously faster? It's a few milliseconds faster. But I mean, there is a difference, right? So this is 24 milliseconds at the DAX query versus 22. So you save 2 milliseconds there. Offset is 13 versus 19, so you save 6 milliseconds there. Again, it's faster, but it's not tremendously faster. It's not like something that's going to be noticeable in the vast majority of ports to almost all the people, right? We're going to cover the offset in more detail later. But again, this is something that I see commonly in the forums. Like maybe every few days, I'll see some kind of thing about, I want to compare this to the previous value. I mean, it'd be different if index and offset allowed us to do recursion in DAX. Now that would be game changing, right? Where I could compute the Fibonacci series without having to have like a column for every digit, every number of the Fibonacci series or something along those lines. That to me would be game changing. So I have a problem saying that offset and index and even window and stuff are game changing. They're just not. They're just different ways of doing what we can already do in DAX. They're not particularly revolutionary, in my opinion. All right, so window. All right, so in the example that they gave, they have this column chart, and they want to have a 3-month rolling average, basically. So there's the moving average 3 months. So you do an average X across window, -2. So that's the previous 2 months, and you're including the current month. There's this, freaky zero that's sitting in here, which that's not really well explained in the article for it. All selected, get to calendar year, and mine's not completely the same because apparently they have a more up-to-date AdventureWorks database with like more current data than what I have. But it's the same thing, right? This, all I've done is, they had month name, they'd shorten it. I have English month name. Otherwise, it's the same exact thing. I just copied, pasted, changed a few column names or whatever. So, and then, then they order by calendar and then by month, and they do it ascending, and then get your total sales, and it gives you a running average. Now, wish they'd get rid of that or change that. And so you get something like this. This line right here is your moving average. Okay, so it extends off into the future, unless you filter things out. So no window. So you can do the same thing with no window. And again, it's the same pattern, right? As really as offset and index. A little different, because we have to end up using calculate table here to get our fact sales table, because we're using a star schema. But again, I mean, okay, I grab my max of my date, end of month, I grab my end of month for dial it back to, I can get the beginning of that month by just saying year, end of month, end of month, one, wrap it in date. So now I've got my beginning and ending values for my dates. So then I can do a calculate table, which then filters my fact sales table to those dates. I summarize it by month, I add my total sales measure, and then I can do an average X across that table. So again, one concept or pattern of to do things versus learning three separate functions that work. Index and offset work fairly similarly, right? There's same basic pattern, but there's a lot to read through and really understand. You get down to the remarks, and you better understand these things, or you're going to get yourself in trouble. And then window is a completely different, you know, I mean, it's completely different from either one of those two. And you have to read through all of this and then read through all the remarks, to understand what it's really doing. So I take I take some exception to the word that it's easier. Is it less DAX? Is it faster? Yes. Um, but I don't know if it's necessarily exactly easier, where you have to learn basically kind of three different ways of doing things, or two different ways of doing things, versus just learning one way of doing things. Learning one way of doing things seems easier to me. Oh, what do I know? Okay, so that kind of is at a high level. Again, and this doesn't, moving averages, the one that I use right here this is from my measure better rolling average, I think is what it's called in the quick measure gallery, where I kind of went through. Well, and I wonder if they're going to update their quick measure to include window versus the way they do it today, which is completely different than, and a little bit bizarre, the way they do it in their current quick measure. So I don't know, maybe they'll update it. But again, I just took, that pattern and just applied it here, and that's how I came up with the moving average. So again, it's a well-known pattern within Power BI that's solvable. Now, again, I don't know if I've tested this one too much, but let's go ahead and test it right here live. So yeah, it's definitely faster than, and let's see what our DAX query looks like. So 11 versus 49. So yeah, I mean, again, we're talking milliseconds here, people. It's, is it going to be noticeable to the average Power BI user? Maybe, maybe not. I doubt it. So let's go ahead and clear this and stop. All right, so then let's take a closer look at offset, because that's the one that I've been experimenting with. I've been holding back on this video because it wasn't released. I don't feel that releasing, especially if you're going to really say something critical about something, it's not fair to do it when it's in beta stage or it hasn't been released yet. But let's go ahead and get into it and show you some of the problems that you can run into with offset in particular. And I haven't really done much with the other ones in a similar kind of vein, but what I've gone back to my pickle and banana, I've added some other fruits here, kiwi, lime, orange, things like that. The data model behind this, close this up. Data model behind this is pretty simple. So I've got actually two tables involved. So here's my main table. I've got this is my fact table: pickle, banana, orange, kiwi, lime, pickle again, so we can sum the things up. But in my table 2, I have pickle, banana, orange, grapefruit, kiwi, lime. So I have in a condition where referential integrity, is not applicable, or has been broken, if you will. So in this one right here, what I've done, this column 1 is coming from table 2, and then my values are in column 2. So this is just a simple sum. So let's say I've got, and I naively create this offset. So I'm going to do a calculate of my sum, and I want the offset -1, all selected, table 2, column 1. And let's see, I'll go ahead and add that to here. And as you can see, this isn't really what you want. But, and this is getting into, my understanding is that these functions are kind of serving as the basis for DAX visual calculations. And boy, that worries me if that is indeed that's the case. But I've seen a number of people state that in different articles and things like that. And that's very concerning to me because DAX doesn't know what's in the visual, as you can clearly see, right? It's still looking at it from the data model perspective. And visual level calculations to me, it shouldn't be DAX unless the DAX is going to use the visual as the data model, right? Versus the actual data model. And any visual level calculation to me means that whatever calculation is going on is using the visual itself as the data model. But it seems like, the way that Microsoft's approaching this seems to me that they're going to catch themselves in the same trap that measure totals are in, right? And that the measure, the DAX doesn't know anything about what's going on at the visual layer, so we have to put all these hacks in to try to make the DAX kind of peek at the visual and like do something, in a total row versus a different row, and that's a bad approach in my opinion. It really violates separation of concerns, and it's problematic. And so you can see, right, the visual, until I put this measure in there, didn't have grapefruit in there because there are no grapefruit. There's no grapefruit rows in the actual fact table. So, all right. So, okay. So can we fix this? All right. So one way of fixing this, I think I got this from Perry, Par, yeah, I know him as Peritus, or Perry 2K. I think I got this from his video when he was doing a one on offset, which was, okay, we can calculate it, and then we can multiply by the divide of the sum, and this is going to return 0 in the case that something has nothing in the fact table, right? And so if we add that to our visual, so now we have, the correct answers, sort of. Let's take offset 2 out. So the problem you get into, right, is that this kiwi line here, the row above it, according to offset, isn't banana, it's grapefruit. Okay, so so you can see that. So what it's grabbing the 0 value from grapefruit and putting it here, right, versus grabbing banana and putting it here. So easy to get yourself into problems. Because again, DAX doesn't know about the visual layer. So this is the kind of problems you can run into. Okay, can we solve it? Well, this was an example, and here's something else that's interesting before I get to the next one. So it's returning 185, and if you actually sum these up, it returns 185, which is bizarre in my opinion, because I would expect that it would be something like 185 minus 40, or 40 in the case, like it should just be 40, because that's the offset from the total, or it could be 33. This 185, how it's doing this, as far as how offset is working, is really kind of black box magic to me, because there's nothing in here that would indicate. So does offset in this case return there is no offset because it's a total row? I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but I wouldn't expect this to just work, because it's doing a calculated sum, and it's not picking anyone in particular. So I mean, how's that working? Is that some kind of internal to the offset that it's taking into account that it's in a total row, or what exactly is going on there? Because it doesn't seem like that should work. Okay, so this was an experiment, where basically I said, okay, can I get rid of the calculate and use sum x? So let's go ahead and add that to our visual, and we get the same thing, but now it works more along the lines of what I would expect for the total row. It wants to get the row above it, which is pickle. in that case. So it's at the end and the order above. So it returns 40 in that case. That seems more logical to me, even though obviously not not what the user is expecting. The user's going to 185, but we get that regardless of whether, an offset 2, well, you wouldn't expect it to return 185 because this doesn't add up to 185. So again, with the measure totals, oh God, a whole new batch of problems with offset. Okay, so now what if we implement, okay, so I created a measure total value, which is just sum of, which is right here, total value, which is just sum of column 2 in table. And this is the pattern from the blog article, right? It's the same pattern. Now let's add this one to our visual. This keeps getting better and better, by the way. All right, so come on. All right, so here we go. So this one is actually correctish if we take out offset 1. It actually solves our problem because it's taking into account that total, it has all these not is blank, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? And so it takes care of the problem that we were having in the previous two. And we actually get 112, 33, 40, and it's ignoring grapefruit in that case. The interesting part about this is this. So what if we take our offset? So instead of using our measure total value, which is just sum table column 2, what if we replace all of the references to our measure with just sum table column 2? So I've done that here, I've done that here, and I've done that here. Okay, it's all I've done. One might think that it would be equivalent. And one would be wrong. So I think offset in particular, I think is extremely problematic. And it's easy to get weird, bizarre results that don't make any sense. And all you have to do is just, literally, all I have to do is swap out a measure for what that measure formula actually is, and I get different results. This is going to drive people insane. Now, of course, we can do it without offset, right? And it's the same pattern, same exact pattern. And I can add that to my visual, and I get the same answers as the offset 4, which is, the same. And, we showed that it was the same on the offset page. So, all right, so now we have that. And now the only difference is this is 185 and this is 40. We know how to solve that, with the measure total, the standard approach to measure totals. But let's see if this is using a star schema. But what if we have a single table data model? So let's use a single table data model. We'll use offset. Ooh, that's really wrong. Offset 2. Add that. That is equally wrong. Offset 3 is really, really wrong. Offset 4, just get blanks. Offset 5, it's just as wrong as the first two. What about our offset, no offset? Oh, look at that. It works in single data models, and it works in star schemas. And this is the problem. So do you want to learn a method that works with, one method that works with single data models, but you have to learn a completely different method that, for star schemas, or do you just want to learn one method? So this goes back to my complaint around easier, right? Is it easier to learn one way of doing things that works in all cases, or do you want to learn multiple ways of doing things depending on the circumstances? That doesn't seem easier to me. That seems harder to me. And again, it's really easy to get weird, bizarre results with offset. So I don't think I have anything else. I'm going to continue doing some experimentation. Maybe somebody can convince me. Comment below if, Greg, you're off your rocker. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I just see it as like more convoluted, black boxy ways of doing things we can already do. And Microsoft is once again missing the boat on self-service BI and that sort of stuff. Because, for example, look, so it's like, okay, this is all going to work if you can get it exactly correct and just the users can't touch it. Because what happens when I do this? Oh, well, that makes no sense at all for any of it. So again, DAX has no clue at the what's going on at the visual layer. So you have to hard code it. And not that my DAX is any better, right? But that's the problem with DAX in general. And using DAX for visual level calculations, unless Microsoft has some slick trick up their sleeves for how they're actually going to pull that off, I think it's just going to lead to misery and just, more problems than what it's worth. I already see that these functions are in many ways more problems than they're worth. And they don't, you know, it's as far as visual level calculations, they're the basis for it. I have severe doubts and concerns. So that's it for this video. Doubts and concerns. I'm not on the bandwagon for index offset and window. I don't see them as revolutionary. I don't see them as anything in particularly like important. I don't even see that they solve really common problems that come up on the forums, every day, every single day. I wish I felt differently. I wish I could get on board with it. I'm really gonna have to find a topic that I can like get on the bandwagon with. Otherwise, people are gonna really think that I just do this stuff just to give Microsoft grief. But I really don't. I try to take an honest look at these things and come to my conclusions. I kind of come to this conclusion, before the whole wave of accolades for these functions, came about. I was already looking at them and like, that was my impression. So. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm way off base on this one. But hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was educational. And I will see you all next time. I've got some cool stuff I've been doing with table and matrix visuals in Deneb. I'll have an enterprise DNA video coming out that explores that really, really in depth, and really improves upon what I had done in my last video with using Deneb to use fixed measure totals in matrix and table visuals. I've got scrolling tables now. I got all kinds of stuff. So look forward to that, and I'll see you all next time.